All right, so my name is Courtney Bailey, and I am currently the chair of the steering committee for RAAC, the Regional Archival Associations Consortium. And what we as a steering committee decided is that one of the roles we could play is helping to bring various organizations together for these sorts of conversations so that we can learn from each other, take note of the things that have worked and try to replicate those in our own organizations, and then also notice the things that have been problematic and see if there are ways we can avoid those problems when we come to those situations. So for our first topic of conversation, we decided to focus on hybrid organizational meetings today. And of course, if we can remember back to pre-COVID, which I don't know about you, for me is getting harder and harder to do, but I seem to remember that most organizational meetings were held only in person. And that typically they were pitched not only as educational events, but also as networking opportunities for people in the profession. But also my memory is that attendance, both in terms of participants and in terms of presenters, seemed to skew a little bit towards those who had institutional support for professional development. True story, my involvement with RAAC began because my state organization has an at-large position on the executive board that is the RAAC representative and that provides support for attending meetings. So very selfishly, that is why I ran for that position, because I didn't have institutional support and I was looking for ways that I could afford to attend meetings. And then as luck would have it, COVID happened and there weren't in-person meetings for me to attend. But at any rate, obviously this is an issue that's been of interest to me for a while now. So obviously, after COVID arrived, then we started seeing a lot of organizations scrambling, especially in that spring of 2020. Some people had to cancel meetings, others sort of recast them in different formats, and then started the process of reconceiving what future meetings were going to look like. So I know for a lot of us, we thought that this was going to be sort of a short-term solution, but you know, as we've lived through the last 3 years, what we've realized is that some of these things we've learned are probably going to have long-term consequences. And so that's what we're hoping to build on today with this discussion, is to figure out what have organizations learned about hosting hybrid meetings so that we can solidify those good aspects of what this meeting format provides, but also share possible solutions to some of the roadblocks that the early adopters may have encountered. So we've brought together today some various folks that hopefully can add some things to your knowledge and answer some of your questions. So from the national perspective, representing the Society of American Archivists, we have two folks with us today. So we have Jacqualine Osafo is the executive director of SAA on its foundation. And in this role, she champions and expands the association's work and leadership in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. She also works to embrace new perspectives and programs within the profession to ensure that SAA is relevant to all stakeholders it serves. And Jackie is responsible for governance for SAA's council, foundation, board, and volunteer leaders. She leads efforts to cultivate existing and create new alliances, partnerships, and collaborations, particularly with vital-related organizations. So she can contribute some things about, especially the logistical side of things for SAA's recent meeting. And then also from the SAA perspective, we have Sarah Quigley, who is the Director of Special Collections and Archives at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Libraries, where she provides vision and leadership for the division, including collection development, digital collections, public services, and technical services functions. She was the co-chair of the program committee for the recent annual meeting of SAA in Boston. So she'll have that perspective. Then for a regional perspective, we have two folks from Midwest Archives Conference. So we have Matt Gorzalski, who's been the University Archivist at Southern Illinois University Carbondale since 2012. He's also been a member of SAA since 2007 and a member of MAC since 2010. And he served on the program committees for MAC's 2015 and 2022 annual meetings, and currently co-chairs the program committee for the 2023 meeting with Kyna Herzinger, who is the other MAC representative with us today. And Kyna is the records manager for the Presbyterian Historical Society. And like I said, is a co-chair for the program committee for MAC's annual meeting. And then for the state perspective, we have from the Society of Ohio Archivists, Adam Wynter, who is the Digital and Special Collections Archivist for the Midpoint Library, a public library system in Butler County, Ohio. He also co-chairs the Society of Ohio Archivists Educational Programming Committee, and as such is one of two people responsible for planning their annual spring conference. So that's the group of experts we tried to bring together today. And what I'd like to do is steering committee develop some initial questions that we would like to pose to these folks. And then if you have questions along the way, you're welcome to drop them into the chat, or later on, we should be able to have time to allow you to ask them orally if you prefer that. So without further ado, let's start learning some stuff. So the first thing I'm interested in is what are some of the logistical considerations for hosting a hybrid meeting? So this could be anything from cost to technology to anything else that influences how hybrid is different from the old-fashioned in-person meetings.
Why don't I jump in? This is Jackie from SAA. So first of all, thank you for inviting SAA to participate in this conversation. We're very excited and first of all, thrilled that we were able to pull off our first hybrid meeting. I would say that it was not an easy journey doing it for the first time without a lot of historical background, but we were able to accomplish a great deal. So when you think about logistics, you want to be able, you need to consider those presentations you wish to display in both the in both the virtual and face-to-face. That can be super expensive. I would say if we look at our budget, what was most costly, I would say the AV was most costly because you need someone to be able to manage sort of this two programs happening at the same time. So as we look at a hybrid conference, you actually bring in two programs in one program. So you look at it from the fact that there are some educational courses that you will do online and some that you will do in person. And then those folks, the ones that you will do in between will be the most complicated one. And you need folks with expertise. So you may think that you understand technology and you may not need an expert. And I'm going to say you're wrong. You need an expert who's taken this journey and who's done this before. Again, the most expensive part is the hybrid part. The other part you want to consider is where you plan to have the meeting and making sure that if you're having it at a hotel, that they've had this experience. And who do you bring in? Do you use the hotel AV folks or do you need to bring in outside folks? I'm going to move in a space that you don't want someone who says, we're doing this for the first time because your name is on the line. And members and those who attend, they're not concerned that you're doing it for the first time. They're concerned that it's successful. And if it's not, then that's your reputation on the line.
That's all good information. Anybody have anything else you want to add to what Jackie led off with?
Yeah, I mean, this is entirely complementary to what Jackie already said, but the sort of labor involved. I know we have a variety of organizations here of a variety of different sizes, and, you know, some folks are able to pay, you know, Midwest Archives Conference has partnered with it's a group called AMC Source, where they help us to negotiate the hotel contract and to do certain aspects. But for the other half of planning the meeting, it is all volunteer support. And so I think, I hope I'm not overstating or speaking on behalf of Matt in an appropriate way, but I think we're just now realizing kind of the extra layers of planning involved when you have to see to those hybrid pieces. And so I think just kind of the labor piece is probably worth mentioning.
The other thing I neglected to say was we hired someone to manage the virtual part of the meeting, because as organizers, as folks who are part of the organization, you are too busy being present. So there's no way I can have myself or a staff person manage the virtual part. So we actually hired a person who also had that technical background, and she was online 100% of the time managing the virtual aspect of the conference. We were lucky that a staff member stayed behind, so she was able to go in and out of the courses. But you need someone, a team of folks, to sort of manage that virtual part while you're there in the space of being present. You can't do them both.
Hello, Adam here from SOA. We're just getting started. We haven't actually done the hybrid yet. We're in our exploratory phase. We did virtual, then went back to in-person last year, and then decided to try to do the hybrid because it was responsive to what the membership wanted. And we're in a unique position because we're a bit smaller, so our programming isn't normally as large, but we're definitely looking into the logistics of how to do all of this, like what do we need and how many programs we're going to offer. But we're hoping that, being a little smaller, we have maybe less hurdles to get over. And we have a bit, I think, as Jackie said, like our name's on the line, but I think being a smaller organization where it's completely volunteer, I think we maybe have a little bit more goodwill, people will be a little more understanding because like it's just us and like that person who maybe it didn't run smoothly, like you work with them or they're across town, so like get a little bit more of that goodwill hopefully.
I'll sort of add on. So today is actually the fall meeting for the Kentucky Council on Archives. And I was just going to sort of pitch in here that they took a unique approach. I mean, because they could not, this is like a group of less than 50 people, probably closer to 35, 40, right? And I thought they did something really creative. They actually offered concurrent SAA digital preservation courses as the kind of digital component. So, and that was the funds were provided, I think, through the Historic Preservation Office for the attendees. But the other component being that because you're not dealing with a huge group of people, you are trying to keep your costs down, and because the infrastructure isn't there, they chose to meet at the state archives, which doesn't have the wired rooms. It was built many, many decades ago, and so I just thought that was kind of an interesting way to sort of to meet the demand and the need, like Adam mentioned, but to do it in a sort of creative way, keeping in mind again all of those costs that are involved.
So I'm hearing a lot about cost, which makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious how you juggle that. Like, do you have to give up some things that you would ordinarily provide to attendees in terms of, receptions or anything else in order to pay for these increased costs? Or does your organization just have to absorb it or find extra sponsors? How do you handle that?
I'm going to say all of the above. So, and we did increase our registration fee, which we had not done in eons. So we had not had an increase in our registration fee, and we got no pushback on that. So, and what we did was we socialized a fee amongst our finance committee and some of our council members just to get initial reaction. And then we were able to go out and say, okay, if they're feeling good about this fee, then we should go ahead and move forward with it. But we did have a separate fee. So if you showed up in just a virtual space, your fee was not as expensive as it was for the face-to-face. And the courses, there were some courses that were different. So there were some courses that were only in a virtual space. And then again, there was a crossover. But when you paid that full registration fee, you sort of got the entire package. So you received the face-to-face and the virtual courses. We increased our fees just a little bit for our sponsors because the truth of the matter is everything's gone up. We're all paying more for everything at the end of the day. And from an economic perspective, you just can't afford to bring a great meeting with the cost being the same. So did we have to give up some things? Yes. Did we have as many receptions? No. One of the things that we did was we shortened our meeting time. So before, I don't know if you noticed, SAA had a meeting, I think it was like 5 or 6 days long. And we decided that can we bring that level of education in a shorter period of time? And the answer to the question is yes. So look at your meeting time, because then that reduced the expenses for the attendees. So instead of them staying 6, 7 nights, they're only staying down 4 or 5 nights. So then their costs went down. Then you can afford to increase that registration fee. So everything has to be considered. We was grateful enough that we had a group that went out and did a lot of the costs for us. So we have an outside consultant that we work with. So she was able to get a lot of those costs for us. And it just happens when we were doing our budget. So it wasn't difficult because we was at budget time. We were planning for FY 2023 budget. So it just happened to coincide. But final figures came in and some of those expenses were a little more than what we had anticipated. So you have to plan for that. And sometimes you can't. You can do your best, and you just can't plan for it because you get on site and you just can't predict what will happen. But as your executive director, I'm going to say yes, because I'm in the space of having a great meeting. And for this being our first hybrid meeting, you have to knock it out of the park. You have to knock it out of the park, because guess what? They won't come back next year. So if you fail the first year, people, it's just like you, if you purchase a product and you're not happy, you won't buy it again. You'll make a different decision the next time. So yes, we had to increase some costs, and we had to pull back on some of the things, and those big things, food and receptions. So pulling back on some of those things. So you look at those big costs and say, okay, do I want to give a great meeting, or do I want to have 5 receptions? I want to give a great meeting. Great question. Thank you.
I don't know that I have anything to add to what Jackie has shared so far, but it is making me wonder how things will change in a couple of years, because I think hybrid meetings are here to stay. It's something members have been wanting since well before COVID, right? It's an accessibility issue. It's a financial issue. So I think that this is going to be standard going forward. And I didn't miss the reception this year, but I didn't want to be in a museum with 700 other people either. So 5 years from now, if we're still not having the reception so that we can continue to be hybrid, will that become something that members miss? And so I'm really interested to see how this is going to evolve over the next several years, as social and public health issues change, and membership kind of gets used to this new way of meeting together. What expectations might also shift.
Yeah, I agree, Sarah. I think that will be fascinating to see how that evolves. And like you, I'm sort of queasy at the thought of open food sources right now, but hopefully that's not always going to be the situation. So that will be interesting to see. So obviously there are huge amounts of logistical considerations for doing a hybrid meeting, but in order to have a meeting, you've got to have the programming side of things too, right? You've got to have good content in order to attract people to the meeting in the first place. So how does changing the delivery mechanisms for the meeting factor into the programming side of things, in terms of how you attract presenters, how you package the content, how you decide, what's going to be synchronous, asynchronous, all those sorts of things?
I'll kick it off and then turn it over to Sarah, because she actually worked on the programming part of it. But one of the things that we were clear upon when asking and doing a call for proposal is giving folks the option of whether or not they wanted to present in person, virtual, or hybrid. And I think it's good for folks to sort of decide what's best for them given this current environment. And so we were able to slot folks in based on their need. Now, the other thing that you have to be prepared for is for someone to cancel. COVID is real. So if one of your, it's best to, and I learned this through one of my colleagues, is that looking at collaborative speakers, so 2 or 3 speakers for a session. So say, for example, if Sarah and Adam are presenting and Sarah said, okay, I have COVID, I can't attend, then Adam should be able to carry on the presentation. We actually had one episode on site, and that was because something happened with the person in terms of transportation. And we didn't find out until literally the last second, when the session's about to start, and realized that instead of us having 2 presenters, we was down to 1. And the one presenter was like super nervous. So you have to go in and help folks out. And I went in, I was like, listen, you got this. You know everything. You're the smartest person in the room. I was just like her cheerleader. I was like, hey, walk on that stage. You have everything that you need to know in your head. The reason why people are here is to hear what you have to say. And I just need you to bring that out of your body. So be prepared for that. And this, again, was literally, I'm getting a text message like, a speaker did not show up for this. We need you in this room like in 2 seconds. So this is me dropping everything to go and have this conversation. And she was very, very grateful to be able to have a cheerleader. So be prepared to be a cheerleader for your folks, and be prepared for someone to cancel. And it's not because they want to, it's just life just happens. But you just have to prepare for sort of like all of those odd situations. So for us, allowing folks to decide how they wanted to present, having a backup plan, and being prepared for the sort of like the unusual thing. We did ask our program committee to be creative, like go and be creative. We don't, sometimes we get caught in this space of we've always done it this way. Well, I think that that phrase should just be thrown out and torn up if we can do that. But there's no such thing as we've always done it this way. So do something different, do something wild, do something that you've never done before. This is a chance to do that. Test the market, see what people like, see what people don't like. So I'm going to let Sarah, because she's set in the space of selecting the different sessions, and I'll let her take over from here.
Matt actually has his hand up, and he hasn't had a chance to contribute anything yet. If you want to jump in before me, Matt, I can talk a little bit more about program committee stuff in a second.
Thank you. Kyna and I are actually going to meet next week to select which sessions will be live streamed. And we last year, as we did with this year, again, asked if during the session submission process, if people would be willing to be recorded, live streamed, or both. And then the chairs last year selected on their own which sessions would be streamed based on anticipated popularity and also variety. We wanted a variety of topics since what we did was simply one room handled every hybrid panel session, and therefore there was only one virtual option per session time block. So for the people viewing exclusively virtually, we wanted to have a variety of topics covered. So I will say about the cancellation, I remember last year we had one case where one of the presenters canceled but pre-recorded the session, or her part of the session, and that happened to be one of the virtual selected for virtual. So we had a situation where we had two live presenters, and then we had to play this pre-recorded segment. And I know there were audio issues at the time. I don't know the detail. It seemed to go over okay. It's just, you just got to be prepared for anything. That's what we learned last year. Every little detail, make sure there's not too much planning. There's not too much that can be overlooked, or there's nothing that can be overlooked. So, that's all for me for now.
Matt makes a really good point. It was one of the things that I was going to bring up about hybrid composition of a panel. So I think that was one of the biggest questions the program committee got after we selected our sessions was, okay, well, actually half of our panel doesn't want to attend in person, but half is excited to. How can we make that work? And I think in some cases we had to do pre-recordings. Jackie will correct me if I'm wrong, because we couldn't necessarily set up a system where the third panelist could stream in live and like give their presentation remotely while the other 2 or 3 folks were in the room. And I don't know that our application allowed people to anticipate that. I think we asked if they were comfortable being in person, if they would prefer virtual, or if they were, and that was maybe it. And I don't know, Jackie, if you're reconsidering how the application is put together this year, if we got feedback on that. But it was one thing that I noticed was the number of questions that came in about whether some of the presenters could be virtual while some were in person. And I hadn't thought about that coming into it or how to prepare for that. The other thing I'll say about programming that I think was really great this year was that we had to do less. One of the things about SAA is that it's always just jam-packed and, 10 sessions a track and hard to make it to all of the things that you'd like to make it to. And it was really nice to only have to, consider 4 sessions in a time slot and have a more relaxed vibe and start later in the day so our West Coast friends could be present. And I, so I think it made the program committee's job actually a little bit easier because we didn't have to try to fill such an intense schedule of programming and could really focus on the sessions that were the best of the best. Because we did really get a lot of great applications, and I think people were really excited to think creatively about a hybrid meeting and what that would mean. And we were allowed to pick the most compelling applications and let our colleagues really shine. Oh, that's funny. There's a comment in the chat about the opposite opinion that the content wasn't appealing to everyone because there wasn't as much. You can't please everybody.
100%, Sarah. Overall, we received positive feedback regarding the conference. We received positive feedback regarding the start time, positive feedback related to the number of courses that were competing against each other. I think that we just need to consider that we're different human beings and our needs have shifted in terms of what we're willing to do and how far we're willing to stretch ourselves when we are attending a conference. Do we really need to have 10 or 12 concurrent sessions competing against each other? Maybe the answer to the question is no, not 10 or 12, but maybe it's 5. And if I pay for the hybrid meeting, I can pick which one I want to attend and get the recording of the rest of one. So I just think that we have to look at things very differently and not how we've always done things. My actual professional association was having their meeting at the same time at SAA. And I was a speaker. But because I had to be at my own conference at SAA, I pre-recorded my portion of it. And they just actually played my version within the presentation. So there's all kinds of creative things that you can do. And I simply said, it's just be creative. And again, throughout the word, we've always done it that way. And look at what can we do differently? And there's just so many options out there. So, there's lots of shift and changes that you can do to keep folks engaged.
With SOA's programming, we decided to, this also kind of goes back to the last question, but we've decided to move ours to a non-central location and then highlight places that people haven't really gone to before. And so we're going to try to focus our programming, at least a small component, on highlighting now the locale that we're at to try to get a bit more regional difference in there. So hopefully that will draw more programming because then people who typically can't attend can now it can be highlighted and they can be broadcasted at audience, hopefully virtually, who maybe not be able to attend that far away. But that's what kind of the angle we're taking, changing it up a little bit.
So Adam, that's a good segue to the next thing that I was interested in asking you all about. In terms of the submissions for presenters, are you finding that the flexibility of not necessarily needing to travel in person to a meeting, is that encouraging more people to submit applications, or is the overall stress of life over the last 3 years still weighing on people and you're finding it harder to fill slots for presenters?
I don't think we had an option related to filling slots. When we look at our program, we were creative in terms of making the annual conference where those folks who showed up in person a little different, because you can't sort of have 2 meetings and it be the same and then expect the folks who show up in person to pay the same amount of money. So I don't remember there being an issue with the number of slots. I will also say in terms of actual attendance, in 2021, nearly 2,000 folks showed up in the virtual space. And in 2022, we were nearly at 2,000 with almost half of the folks showing up face to face and the other half showing up in virtual space. So our numbers didn't shift very much, but how folks showed up did change.
And related to that, Jackie, we've had a question in the chat. Has that number of virtual attendees increased since August? Like, have there been people, I know I've seen several pushes out on email that you can still sign up and attend the recorded sessions. So have you noticed new attendees? I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
So is the question Jordan asked in regards to how many people were watching the recording after the fact? I do not have that information at my fingertips. I'll just put my email in the chat and you can follow up with me via email and I can find out how many of them attended or watched the videos, watched the presentation afterwards. And then your question is related to the number of new people shift. So I don't have that number. I know that we had some first-time attendees as always, but I don't know the breakdown between first-time attendees from the virtual space and the hybrid space. As your executive director, I was watching the numbers, like what do you call the stock market? Like, are we meeting our numbers and how many folks did we look at like budget? Because we were very conservative when we actually budget for annual meeting. And this is a huge, I mean, it's a guessing game, honestly. It is truly a guessing game. When you look at doing a hybrid conference for the very first time, you have no idea. So we went back and looked at trends from previous years in terms of how many folks showed up in the face-to-face space, how many folks showed up in virtual space. And then we reduced those numbers about 20% and said, okay, we know 100% of the folks are not going to show up. So in reducing those numbers, the other thing that we have to do and you have to pay attention to is your hotel contract. So if you're like SAA and you sign a contract for 2023, 2024, and you sign those contracts in 2018 before COVID, when 2,000 people were showing up, that negotiation must happen immediately. And the hotels are not as flexible as they were when COVID was happening because they're in the business of making money. So if you're having your meeting at a hotel, please look at that contract and start having those conversations very soon. So again, I will put my email address in the chat. If you want to find those things that I don't have at my fingertips, you can just email me.
Very good.
In Midwest Archives Conference, we only did, last year was our first hybrid or virtual attempt. And we, though, have not seen an increase in submissions. We've seen a decline over the last several years. And this year was pretty difficult, I felt, to put together a complete program. I mean, we managed to do it, but razor thin, like no room for error. If somebody cancels, it'll be a big hole. And so no, virtual has not impacted that.
I'll add real quick. We haven't actually put our call out yet. Our meetings in May, and because we're smaller, we typically have a little bit of a shorter timeline. And our call is about to go out. Hopefully, I think we haven't had the dates yet, but sometime in December. But we've kind of heard this feedback and noticed from last year about lack of submissions. So we've kind of already started to tried to start cultivating proposals that we know, or start talking to our colleagues of people like, hey, present, like, here's a theme, or, starting to get that word out, not just within our committee, but within our council as well, and just our networking, trying to get people to get encouraged to submit. And we're a little bit different because, like, I think our threshold, we're much smaller, so we're a bit more welcoming to proposals that, maybe aren't as academic, but so I think we have a little bit easier that way because we are more welcoming in that sense, and that doesn't mean maybe not as daunting for people, hopefully. But yeah, we're trying to, like I said, get people out there now, get word out there now, and also hopefully with the local component, we can really tap into the people around the area and then to get them to come out and present. Maybe they wouldn't normally present, but because we're in their backyard, we can focus and highlight them.
Yeah, I apologize. I got a knock on my office door and missed part of the question. But in terms of just like sheer numbers of submissions, I think in 2021, they were down significantly. And we're back up this year. I think we got between sessions and posters, something like 112, but I don't think that's pre-COVID numbers. I think it still is lower than we're historically used to, but getting better. I hope the 2023 program committee gets even more now that folks know a little bit more about what hybrid looks like.
And if I can just jump in really quick, I would love to actually hear from, because I know we've got some Georgia folks who just had their conference, but I'd love to hear if others can sort of chime in on this question of of how many sort of submissions and proposals, but also if there's any sense of why that is. Is it the, fatigue and we're at our professional threshold, or is it, the worry of travel? I'm just so curious about this because, like Matt said, it was a little bit of a challenge this year, and that was not one thing I was expecting of all the possibilities. So.
Hey everyone, I'm happy to chime in from the Society of Georgia Archivists perspective. I see that Leah's on the call as well, but I won't throw her under having to speak if necessary. She was our assistant program chair, but I can speak from my observations as president of SGA this year that we also experienced low submission numbers. And unfortunately, Kyna, I cannot speak to the why we experienced low submission numbers for session panels. I mean, I think exhaustion is a clear, easy go-to answer for that. But actually, I mean, I think frankly, and I'm just coming up with this as I'm speaking out loud, it might be connected in some way to the sense of why people want to get together anyways, which may not be for educational opportunities. It may be for the camaraderie and just ability to be able to talk with one another about what they're dealing with on a face-to-face basis. And thus you just don't see that same engagement with people wanting to submit session proposals, because at least for them, like, that's not their driving force behind why they want to go to this in-person event to begin with. But that is complete supposition on my part.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that other than just agreeing with Kathy. We didn't get a lot of submissions. I thought a lot of our content was good, but we didn't have a lot to pick from. And we, as we've been talking about, just struggled with trying to figure out how to make the hybrid work when we didn't necessarily have somebody with that expertise. I think it mostly worked out, but we are wondering about ways to make it better for next year.
I just wanted to jump in, and because it reminds me of what Kyna put in the chat about rethinking our approach to conferences and in general, and asking, if our Saturdays are poorly attended, should we maybe not have make Saturday part of the conference? And I just wonder, what happens if the year you decide to maybe just do a Thursday and Friday conference is the year that you get flooded with proposals? And then at what point can you confidently decide, okay, lower submissions than we're used to is now the new normal, so maybe we can confidently go forward with a 2-day conference as opposed to 2.5 or 3 days. So, but yeah, and it reminds me of our experience this year. Filling all those slots with quality programs was challenging. And if we had only maybe 2 days as opposed to going into Saturday, it would have just been a better or a stronger program overall. But it's real hard to tell year by year.
Jackie, you want to add something to that?
One of the things I put in the chat is that we surveyed our membership. So as we was looking to renegotiate our contract with our hotel, we surveyed our membership to help us get to that number. So there's nothing wrong with going out and asking your attendees, your membership and past attendees. If we did this, then what? We also ask questions related to making it a smaller meeting. So we shorten sort of like the time away from your families and from your job, because we realized that folks are not very interested in being away from their families and their jobs for an entire week. So that gave us some information. So just do a couple surveys to your membership and to your past attendees so that you have some data when you decide to make a change. Say, hey, we asked you. And people appreciate being asked before you make some major changes to a conference. So we were in a space of, let's get some information before we make these shifts. So that helped guide some of our changes.
So there have been several comments now, both by panelists and in the chat, about what the purpose of our meetings is. And I kind of laid out at the beginning, it seems like it used to be a dual purpose. Is that still appropriate? And if not, then what do we do with that, that networking aspect of things? I mean, once again, personal example, when I was new to this field, what I was told is you need to attend, I live in North Carolina, so attend SNCCA's annual meeting and you'll get to meet people, get your face out there. That'll make it easier to get a job, that sort of thing. So how do we help those people new to the field if we don't have those in-person kind of networking aspects to our annual meetings?
I wonder how this varies depending on the size of the organization, because I am just recently from Georgia and a member of the Society of Georgia Archivists, and I never attended SGA for the same reasons I attend SAA, right? SGA for me was always a lot more about networking and seeing colleagues and learning more about what they're doing, while attending SAA is a lot more about education for myself and thinking about how I might change my practices, just because it's bigger and the kinds of sessions typically are different. And so I think these questions are really interesting and are going to be really hard to grapple with over the next several years. And I also want to be clear, like, I don't say that to denigrate SGA's programming. It's always been great. It's just different. And I think we'll have to start teasing out why people love regionals versus why people love SAA, and what our strengths are and what we can do differently as small and large organizations, providing different value to archivists across the country.
And I feel like it's a little bit of a careful balance too, because I think I just really appreciate that comment, Sarah. It just in reflecting in my own participation at various levels. And the thing I would say as a former member of the Kentucky Council on Archives Board is that there are those sort of local folks, Adam, as you mentioned, that who won't and don't, I mean, I think don't have the institutional support, but for various reasons aren't going to make it to SAA or even to MAC. And so for them, KCA is their educational opportunity. And so like, how do you strike a balance between really kind of some, I mean, just, yeah, different reasons for attending, so.
Yeah, personal experience coming from a public library. There's no way I'll ever go unless I pay for myself be able to attend SAA. It's just not in our mission. I do archival work, primarily digitization work, but there's no way I can go to SAA. Even when it was in like Chicago, it was in Cleveland, in our own backyard. It was an ask that was too far. Mac might be a little bit something more, within our my range as a, but yeah, so that's definitely a consideration we have to make. And in Ohio, there's a lot of universities, a lot of small universities have archives. There's public libraries that have archives, a lot of corporate ones. So we had to kind of strike that balance of like, how can we reach them? A lot of loan arrangers, how can we provide access to them for the educational part? Because SAA might use, pie in the sky, So I think it's a really good point.
So one of the things that Jackie's already sort of given us some ideas about some of the positive feedback that SAA received from attendees about the hybrid meeting. Does anybody else have examples of good things that people came away from your hybrid meetings thinking?
I looked at our comments from last year, and there wasn't anything negative. It was, people were very complimentary in how easy it was to get into Zoom, and even we did have some technical glitches here and there, but people were pretty understanding of that and didn't complain about it. So, and my personal experience has been good when I've done SAA virtually the last couple of years, and I thought it was smooth, impressively so.
And I'll just continue to iterate. You have to bring folks to the table who've done this. We're 2 years. I can't even think, when did COVID start? 2020? I can't recall. But we're 2-3 years into this. And there are a lot of folks who have a few of these meetings under their belt. So the best thing to do is bring them into the fold of your conversation, your organization, and your planning, because they have already experienced the do's and the don'ts. And again, if you're doing this for the first time, you got to knock it out of the park. You have to knock it out of the park because people won't come back the next time. So we were intentional on how do we create a great conference, whether you show up in a virtual space or whether you show up face-to-face. Did we continue to have some networking events? Yes. We had our exhibit networking event. We had our first time attendees event. The foundation had an event. So we had 3 social events for folks to attend. Now, were they heavily attended? And I'm going to say the foundation event was heavily attended. The first time attendee, I walked in that room and I was like, whoa, Nelly. There were tons of people in that room. The exhibit hall was much more spread out, so people were able to engage in a space that was probably more comfortable with themselves. But the key to the matter is that you have to go back to a little bit of normalcy. And at the end of the day, we're just all happy to see each other. We're tired of being in this box. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm one of those, my sister called me the extra extrovert. So my first 6 months of COVID, I was like, I'm going to be depressed in a little bit because I need people. So I think all those folks who need people are the folks who are going to show up in a face-to-face because they will take the chance. They will do it safely. One of the things that we didn't talk about is that we recommended that folks wear a mask. It was not a requirement because right now it's not a requirement. And we went so far as we passed out masks. So when you attended SAA conference, you could have one right now here sitting. You'll have my lovely SAA mask right here at my desk at home, is that we distribute these. We also distribute hand sanitizer because we know that these things will make you feel better. These are the things that we're now using as part of our daily lives. So we provided these things for you. And we told folks that you can wear a mask or you didn't. Our lanyards were designed around the fact on whether or not you wanted a hug or you wanted a handshake or you didn't want to be touched. So we had 3 different colors. And the color, I think green was like full-blown hug. I want everything. Do you know those lanyards ran out? We had none left. We actually ran out and had to go out and buy some generic green lanyards because the majority of the folks took the green lanyards. They wanted to be hugged. So you have to put all these things in place. And I would just say the majority of the folks they're going to be safe and they want to go back. They want to go back to being with each other. We're just those type of human beings.
Sarah, what do you have to add to that?
Well, I was going to talk about the lanyards. I thought they were so great. But one of the things that it came up kind of in the chat, but we haven't really addressed it yet, was stuff like Zoom fatigue and how that has contributed to virtual and hybrid conferences. In 2020 and 2021, I really struggled with SAA being virtual, especially in 2021 because I was back in the office. And checking email and being on Slack and probably doing a little bit of processing while I was listening. And so I never felt like I got the same kind of conference experience as when I'm just devoting my attention to the conference itself. And I know that that's not the same for everyone, which is why hybrid is so great, right? So I was thrilled to be back in person and to see folks and to have like a conference experience. And I actually know at least one person who came to Boston in person and then did only virtual sessions from her hotel room because she mostly came to see people. And I think that is just kind of funny. And I bet that will continue to happen because so many of us go to the conference for the people and less for the education aspect. But I think it is just important that we continue to consider the way that different people need to receive their content and to be as flexible as possible so that the most of us can get the most out of the conference as we can provide for them, right?
Matt, did you have something you wanted to add, or did it already get addressed?
Well, I was going to comment on virtual networking, but we're running out of time. It's that I've given it some thought this year for MAC and how we would pull it off. I know last year it wasn't given any thought because we were simply trying to make it happen for the first time, and we were consumed with getting it right. And again, this year it's mostly the virtual component is strictly access to the sessions and not, I mean, networking is not even on our radar. And, you know, in an environment like this isn't Zoom, but in an environment like this, it's hard to network because you have one speaker at a time. You can't have everyone talking over each other like you can in a normal reception area where you go from maybe table to table and just meet people and introduce yourselves. And then with these platforms, I don't know how to, like, who would have administrative privileges to create these little breakout rooms so that, hey, if you wanted to go have a small chat over here with some select few people, then you can. How do you make that happen virtually? I mean, is everyone an admin? I mean, the only thing I can think of is maybe you have a handful of Zoom links that are organized by topic and say, hey, if you're interested in this topic and kind of network under that, then go to this link at this time. And because other than that, I'm not sure how to make it happen. So
Well, let me
Jennifer
follow up.
posted something.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think she's saying what you were, that sometimes everyone is an admin to do the breakout room thing. So let me tie two things up, and then we'll see if any of the attendees have other questions that we need to address here. Apparently this is not an issue in the Midwest. People must be nicer there if y'all receive no negative feedback, but I'm curious if anyone else has gotten negative feedback that the rest of us could learn from, things to avoid.
The one thing I would say that you need to be mindful of is avoiding staff and volunteer burnout. So for those of you who do not have a staff, SAA has a staff, and they were working hard and heavy prior to conference. You have to give them some time to breathe and take care of themselves before the conference and after the conference. So here's why you see SAA shuts down after the conference, because you have to take care of your staff. You also have to take care of them during the conference time. And that means feeding them and bringing COVID tests and you know, being social with them. So you're taking care of not only your attendees, but as your executive director, I am also taking care of a staff. And whatever you need to do to make sure that they're doing well and they're at their best is what's necessary. And sometimes that means, all right, everyone go to their room and order dinner, or we all go out to dinner. So whatever it is that you need to do on site to keep them excited, to keep them energized, and keep them engaged and in a healthy state of mind, consider those things. And then most of the time it is taking care of one most important thing, and that's food. Because we have no time to think about food. So make sure that you take care of your staff before the conference, during the conference, and after the conference. And you'll do great. Just take care of your people. Thank you, Sarah, for that. You have some great folks working at SAA, definitely.
Well, I know some of the questions we've been answering along the way that have come up in chat, but is there any other question that someone wants to ask either in chat, or go ahead and unmute yourself and ask? While people are thinking, my last question, Jackie sort of already started answering, but it's sort of the question of sustainability, right? I mean, enough of you have already commented that it seems like the hybrid thing is here to stay in one form or another. So how do we make that sustainable? It sounds like taking care of your staff before, during, and after is certainly an important part of that. Any other considerations that organizations should be thinking about?
Be creative in terms of your content and how you deliver your content. Invite experts to come into the room to help you understand, especially that AV part. I would say that's probably the most expensive piece. Engage your members as you make huge decisions. You know, as I commented in the chat, is survey your membership and attendees. Have them be part of it. No surprises. Tell them what the annual meeting is going to look like before annual meeting happens, so that when they arrive, there's no surprises.
I think communicating that choices have to be made is also really important. If we want to always be hybrid, that may mean we always need to be smaller than we're used to. And that everyone won't love that. But I think if you're transparent about hybridity is our priority and therefore these things must be different, most people will understand that. And just be flexible and be prepared to change.
And I'll add something that I've been kind of wondering within the confines of our primarily volunteer run sort of situation is whether or not we need to add sort of like positions or a subcommittee or something where we say the virtual component is just your responsibility, and kind of dole out some of the tasks that way, instead of saying, okay, all the same people are taking on this added layer of complexity. So.
I think that's a great idea to have one group focus on it, but as long as you bring them back together so that while in my mind, we're planning 2 meetings, but the experience needs to be 1 meeting. So when you attend, it needs to be 1 meeting. But in our mind, we know that we're planning sort of like 2 trains moving at the same time. But at the end of the day, it just needs to be 1 train. But that's a great idea to have your folks focus, one group's focus on the first virtual and one focus on the in person.
All right, any last words of wisdom? All right, well, I want to thank our panelists again. This is a nice way to spend a part of our Friday, and appreciate the wisdom that you shared. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. Y'all take care.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.